Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the God Goals and Girl Talk podcast. I am so turned about the next couple of weeks of this podcast. We are going to be having a very special guest, Miss Tatum Temia Ayomike, who is the host of the Blessed and Bossed Up podcast. And this podcast reaches millions, okay, across the globe. She's also the founder and the CEO of Anchored Media, where she and her team have helped develop and produce several successful podcasts totaling over 3 million listens across the globe. Tatum is somebody's whole entire wife, okay? Shout out to BJ. She's a mother out here in these streets, okay? Her baby is, oh my gosh, he just is the cutest thing ever. And most importantly, she has mastered making God the CEO of her endeavors. And she is not to be played with out here, okay, in real life or in the spirit. I am so excited that she's going to be joining us over the next couple of weeks because she really has impacted my life in several different ways. And so to be able to do this interview, it just really shows how if you are obedient to God, he will blow your mind, right? Like one day I'm listening to her podcast. God gives me all of these instructions to start my nonprofit. He gives me all of these instructions to start this very show. Okay, so y'all need to be tuned in because Tatum is dropping gems. We're talking all about what it means to be blessed and bossed up. And I'm just so excited for you guys to hear this interview. It was amazing. And honestly, it could have went for a lot longer. She definitely will be back on the show. So without further ado, here is part one of our Blessed and Bossed Up series with Miss Tatum Temia Ayomike. You are now tuned in to the God Goals and Girl Talk podcast, where we discuss living for the kingdom of God while living in the culture. I am your host, Charlotte Walker. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner, wife, daughter, sister, auntie, and friend. And I am on the journey of producing and fulfilling every purpose that God saw for me before the beginning of time. And I want you on this journey with me. Each week, we are going to discuss how to apply God's word to our everyday lives. Get ready for some word, some gems, and a few laughs along the way. Now let's start the show. All right, I am so excited for today's interview. Tatum, thank you so much for joining us here at God Goals and Girl Talk. I'm turned. I'm super turned about this. I'm like, oh, I cannot wait. So for those who may not know you or may not have ever listened to like Blessed and Bossed Up, can you just share a little bit about yourself with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me.
Yes.
It's not too many times I get to be on the other side of the microphone. So I'm excited to be on here. I'm excited for what God is doing with your show, like just to watch you evolve and just continue the mission and the mandate that he has for this show is inspiring to me. So definitely thank you for having me on here. I definitely don't take it lightly. But as far as me, girl, I'm terrible at this. I don't know. I mean,
I got this little intro now. I can make you cry if you like.
no thanks. But for those of you guys who may not know me, my name is Tatum Temia Ayomike. I am the host of the Blessed and Bossed Up podcast. Through that podcast, my mission really is to teach people how to make God the CEO of their life and their business. I really set out to bridge the gap between faith and between business. I believe that if God knew us before he formed us in our mother's womb, then he knew about these visions and these ideas and these business endeavors that we have. And if we just connect back to him, then we can move according to his plan and not our own. And so that's my mission on the podcast. I also run a company called Anchor Media, where we develop and produce shows. Right now, we're starting with podcasts, but we're definitely going to expand into all sorts of media, but that's where I get to be the brain. So I'm the voice behind Blessed and Bossed Up, but I'm the brains behind Anchor Media. In between there, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm chasing around a very active 8-month-old who says that crawling and walking is not what he feel like doing. He want to run
nah.
and he want to climb. And that means me and these knees that's getting up there got to chase up after him.
Oh, that's so funny. He said, nah, scratch that. We're going to go straight to this.
Exactly. Like, no, this small change, mom. I'm running.
I'm running out here in these streets and you're going to follow me. Yeah. So just a little, like, let's not skirt past the fact all of the work that Anchor Media has done, like your podcast and the podcasts that have been attached to Anchor Media, over like 4 million listens, okay, across the globe. So like this isn't a small feat, especially because I have listened to your show for a long minute, and I know that you started just with what you say, a book, a podcast, and a journal, right? To now have watched and kind of, been a part of this journey with you on the other side of your podcast. Like, gotta be out here doing stuff, right? I love that you talked about how we bring everything back to God, because sometimes I feel like we overcomplicate this so much. Like, it could all be so simple, but we rather make it hard. That's not in the Bible. That's Lauryn Hill, but it makes sense. It makes sense. Like, it's not hard. And a lot of times when I explain faith to people, I'm like, it's not really hard. It's a condition of like, I'm gonna do whatever he say, no matter what. Yeah, girl, because we humans be out here wrecking stuff.
Yeah, and I think because, and one thing that I talked about recently in a podcast is we want the blessings, we want to skip to the blessings and we want to skip over the basics. And faith isn't hard when you have the basics. What may be difficult initially is transitioning in both your lifestyle and your mentality from what you're used to what God is calling you to. That is difficult because it's stretching you and it's molding and reworking the way that you've been conditioned up until that point. But once you embody like some of those core values of truly living these things out, which for me, one of them is decisiveness. So my pivotal moment was, I told God, I had this moment in my closet and I said, you know what, God, I'm a go-getter. I'm the type of person, when I set my mind to something, I'm going to do it. I'm an overachiever. I'm very ambitious and I work hard. That has produced a lot of great things in the world. But the reason why it hasn't produced fruit is because I'm not passionate or haven't fixed my mind to where I'm going to do things your way. And I asked him, being very vulnerable in that moment, I said, well, God, if you light a fire on the inside of me for you and you ignite this spark and this passion for you.
This episode of the God Goals and Girl Talk podcast is brought to you by the Producer Society. The Producer Society is an online membership group for women looking to draw closer to God, to develop godly community, and to produce everything that God has called her to. Members of the Producer Society receive early access to the God Goals and Girl Talk podcast episodes, monthly Bible studies, exclusive online events, and so much more. If you are ready to get connected with other women who are chasing after God and wanting to produce His purpose in their lives, then this community is for you. Visit www.producersociety.com to start your free 30-day trial today. Now let's get back to the show.
We good. I know that we'll be good at that point. And God helped me to what I said. And He lit a passion and a fire and a desire to please Him on the inside of me. And then I met my decision with my actions and I stayed the course. And so whenever things do come up where I have to, my loyalty is checked, I go back to that decision that I made and say, well, I decided that I was going to do business God's way. So that means I have to turn this down because God said no. I decided that I was going to live for Him. So that means that this decision in this moment is a no or yes, you know what I mean? Whatever the decision may be, but it has to align with that decision. So I think something I want people to take away from is this faith journey is about being decisive. And
Mm-hmm.
you have to first make a decision that you're going to live life on God's terms. And then number two is perseverance. And I had a little conflict with perseverance now, because one of the fruit of the spirit is long suffering. And I don't like the way that sounds. So I'm like, God, well, what you mean I'm long suffering like that? Huh? And so I'm like, well, let me look this up in another translation, because this ain't sitting right in my spirit. So, and in other translations, long suffering translates over into perseverance. And that one had a little bit more hope in it. So I like that word better. But perseverance is another aspect of it. So if you decide that you're going to do things God's way, and that you're going to persevere through whatever may not feel good or may look differently than what you think God should be doing in your life, those two things will make it a lot easier.
Yeah, that is so good. And even when you talked about that, us being decisive, the Bible says that a double-minded man can expect nothing from God. And I think that so many of us hold ourselves up. We out here, it's almost like, oh, I think I'm waiting on God, I'm waiting on God. Now, sis, you haven't done the last thing God told you to do, or you keep doing this back and forth thing because you want to be lukewarm, or you have one foot in and one foot out, and that's not going to work. My pastor has said on Sunday that too many of us want our flesh, or want our faith to conform to our flesh, when it's the other way around. Your flesh has to conform and submit to your faith, or you're not going to get any kind of fruit out of that. And so I think that's so good that you make a decision, you let your yeses be yeses and your noes be noes, for sure. That's so
But
good,
that's
girl.
why I was going to say as well, that's why the basics are important. And going back to some of the basics, reading the word, knowing how to hear God's voice, learning how God speaks to you, praise and worship, like these are foundational things, especially reading the word, because God and his word are one.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people, we try to do this faith journey by our feelings, and our feelings will always be deceitful. And appealing to our feelings and our flesh is how the enemy gets so many of us off track, because he presents things to us that feel good, that look good, and because the euphoria that you feel, you identify that with God, when that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't identify that what's being presented to you is not of God, because you've skipped over the foundational things of understanding who God is, how he operates, different characteristics of him. So you're going to fight a fight without the tools,
Yep.
without the armor, without the knowledge, without scoping out the war that's at hand. And so that's another reason why those basics are important, because if we operate by our flesh and how we feel, we're always going to get to the point where we're away from God.
Yeah, that's so good. The beginning of the year, we actually did a series called Back to the Basics, where we were just getting back into the stuff that doesn't seem so glamorized. Like, we not up shouting and hooping and hollering, but too many of us, whether we know it or we want to accept the fact or not, we are in war. Right. So we
Mhm.
can either choose to sit on our hands, or we can choose to, gird up with our sword, that's the word of God, with our shield of faith. And what I found was that a lot of people, when they go to church, they're told, like, you should read the word, but nobody has sat down and said, and this is how you do it, or
Mhm.
here's a good place to start. And so we wanted to squash that, because this year we're really focusing on developing that divine discipline, where we're, consecrating ourselves, where we're committed to God and we're being consistent. And that's something that definitely will take time, and will fall, right, we'll have that long suffering. But what I've learned is some of my biggest battles, some of those seasons where I felt like nothing was working, was God ordained, right? Like, even Jesus got led into the wilderness. And so I've kind of taken the position of trying to learn what I can in this season. Like, okay, God, instead of me complaining, okay, like,
Mhm.
instead of me complaining, what are you trying to teach me? And where can I be a blessing to somebody while I'm here? And now that I've started to do that, um, it still does not feel great. But I rest assured, and like Romans 8:28, that all things are working together for my good. And so having an understanding, right, like, that's people go to the gym. Nobody wants to get up at 4 o'clock and go to the gym, but that the work that you're putting in is so that you can get the benefit of your heart, your body, and your mind benefiting from that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about this. What does being blessed and bossed up mean to you? Y'all can't see, but I'm wearing my God is my CEO shirt. Okay. I got my busy building wealth mug in my office. Like I'm doing all the things right right now. But what does being blessed and bossed up mean to you?
Man, being blessed and bossed up it's a lit lifestyle, honestly. Like it's a life to where you're uncompromising in the way that you choose to live your life. And so what I mean by that is being blessed and bossed up is you're pleasing God, but you're also enjoying the fruits of your labor. You're also getting the desires of your heart. So that means that I have the business and the business isn't taken away from my faith. So my business is bearing much fruit. So being blessed and bossed up means I started this podcast, but my voice is being heard in places my feet have never touched. That I get to sit in my office with my feet on the desk and record my podcast and know that somebody in Australia is going to get a word from God. It means that I don't have to work as hard to produce because I'm not the one that's doing the establishing. And I get to rest in that. And it's a level of swag that comes from that. It's that my husband, I'm a crown to my husband's head, that he looks at me with heart eyes emojis
Okay.
because he sees the glory of God on me. It's my son growing up in being led in the things of God to where he's going to be uncompromising in what God has called him to be because he's seen the foundation that his parents have set. It's him being not having to worry about things. Like I watched a documentary that really broke my heart on Netflix, and it was about like the destruction of like Black people and stuff like that through the crack epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was watching and I was like, oh my gosh. And I was just like, man, things like poverty really has set a lot of our people back
Yeah.
because we've had to do things. Even like when you think about like food and things like that. A lot of our bad eating habits are a result of not having the good stuff, right? We had to eat what we can, and that has caused a lot of diseases in our family, or poverty. It's caused a lot of our people in our lineage to make bad decisions because they had to do what they had to do to survive. And so for me, being blessed and bossed up is that I have the privilege of being an heir to God's riches and glory. And my son, because of that decision and because of what God is producing in my life, my son doesn't have to grow up in poverty. He doesn't have to make certain decisions to survive because of the decisions that I've made and my husband have made to serve God. Like that's a level to me of swag, of confidence, of privilege because of the King that we serve. It's just a vibe that I personally love, that I try to get other people to understand on the show. But in a nutshell, being blessed and bossed up is being uncompromising, and it's seeing the fruit of God in every area of your life.
That is so good. And the fact that it's not just tied to material things. I always tell people all the time, like, when the Bible says to leave inheritance for your children's children, material things cool. Okay. Like my kids ain't gonna never have to deal with Sally Mae or any of her cousins. Okay. Like that's that. But on a greater sense, I always talk about my grandmothers on the show. They may not have had a financial or a monetary inheritance to leave me, but the best thing they ever gave me was just that insight to have that relationship with God, to teach me the importance of walking with him and really knowing him for myself. And so even that all by itself, like there's not enough of us focusing on passing that down. And it is a whole vibe because I'm slowly getting into this whole blessed and bossed up thing. I'm like, nah, I'm not worried about that. like God gonna take care of all the things. It's for me to to do and focus on what he's told me to. And because I have this very type A, everything's organized, color coded type of flesh at baseline, it has taken some work to be like, okay, I'm gonna let it all the way go. I'm gonna give it all to you. But I have found myself, being in one of the busiest seasons of my life, but not feeling pressed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like I was going to school and working and I was drowning. And now, I'm doing, managing several different things and I'm straight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is so good. Okay, so can you tell or share a little bit about your journey with God, and then coming into making God the CEO of your business, and how you made that decision and kind of what that path looked like for you.
Yeah, so I've always known, I didn't grow up in church, but I've always known that God's hand was on me, if that makes sense. I've always been able to identify that there was something different about me, or there was even in my loneliest moments, I never felt fully alone. It's kind of hard to explain. But like I said, growing up, I didn't grow up in church. I was familiar with church. So I feel like every black grandmama be in church. So I was not every, but most. So I would go to my grandmother's church sometimes, and my mother would go to church. She went to like a mega church, and it was interesting to me because I saw two different extremes. I saw the Baptist church on the hill in the hood when I went to my grandmother's church, and it was very, a lot of poverty, a lot of just making it. The prayers were heavily based on, God would pay this bill, he would pay that bill. Then I would go to my mother's church, which was a mega church, and PG County, Maryland, which is a area in Maryland where there's a lot of affluent Black people. And so that church, it's an ATM in the lobby. The pastor got every car, all of that. The messages were very prosperity based. And so I was confused as to, well, who is God then? Like, it was
Right.
weird to me because I was put in two very different environments. And so I guess that lack of full understanding just kind of led me to just be like, I'm just gonna do whatever I want to do. And so my first try at trying to be saved was when I was actually in high school, and there I went to a church, and there was an altar call, and I just felt like I needed to give my life. So I went up for the altar call, and that's when I got saved initially. And I tried to live for God, but I didn't have the tools. I didn't know what that looked like. And at the time I was maybe like 17, 16. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know, like, I didn't have anybody else who was trying to do that. So I just reverted back to business as usual. Even through college, like, I just knew that it was like God was always there. And it wasn't until after college, because I was living my best life, it, well, my best wretched life, but it wasn't until maybe 2015 or so, not too long after I graduated college, where I was like, okay, I'm tired of playing the fence. I started going to church on my own. I started learning a lot more about the Bible, and I was like, okay, I think I want to get to know God for real on my own. I was living on myself. I was living by myself. I was finally like not, my life wasn't being dictated by anybody else at that point. And so I had started reading the Bible. I would watch sermons because that was the only way I could really get an understanding. I would watch sermons, I would journal, and then I bought a journal. I bought Joyce Meyer's book, How to Hear from God, and I bought a Bible. I didn't get my study Bible yet, but I just bought a Bible for myself. And so I was writing down, and that's really where I decided I was going to teach myself what was going on, because nobody was really teaching me what I needed to know in order to actually apply this thing in my day-to-day life. I felt like even when I went to church that I would get pumped up, but then when Wednesday came around and it was time to apply what I learned, I didn't know what to do. And so I started doing things like, whenever a scripture would kind of stick out to me that the pastor said, I would write it down, and then I would go back to my Bible at home and read it and study it to figure out why that hit me that way. And so I was just basically a student during that period. And then it wasn't until, and at this time I was also building a business. So I became an entrepreneur in 2015, and I started with a youth program because I wanted to give back to girls, and I wanted them to pretty much, I wanted to be to them who I didn't have. And so I developed this curriculum. I got into schools. We were doing good. Top 30 under 30 in the Washington, D.C. area. Started seeing levels of success. I'm mixing and mingling with some of the most known people in the D.C. area. So I'm on a right path. But I'm also in the closet, so to speak, when it came to my faith. And so as I was doing that, I shut down the youth program because I realized that I liked the work. I didn't like the business part. The whole pitching to schools and all of that was not fun to me. It didn't feel good to me to have to convince people why kids needed mentorship. So I was like, I got to do something else. So I pivoted. I started teaching people how to build marketable brands and businesses. So my undergrad degree is in PR. All of my work history was in marketing in some type of way. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna use this and I'm gonna help people. Started doing great. On my way to having this successful business. Still on the back end building up my faith. I got
Hey sis, are you enjoying this week's show? I pray that you are. Make sure that you connect with us and you keep the conversation going. Follow us over on Instagram at God Goals and Girl Talk. Make sure that you subscribe to the show, you rate the podcast, and you leave us a review. And don't forget to share the show with your friends, your coworkers, your mama and them, all the people, okay? Okay, now let's get back to the show.
yes, I was also building up my faith. And I was helping people with these businesses. I was growing in God. I felt like I was good. I was on the right path. I was doing what I thought I was supposed to be doing. I ended up hiring a business coach. I quit my job a year later because I felt God told me that it was time to leave. And I knew it was time to leave because my plan would have been I was going to leave about 6 months after. And so when he told me to leave, I would have had to completely rely on faith. And based on my understanding at the time, the way I will always verify if I'm hearing from God or not is if the action aligned with what I was learning in the Bible. And so when I was analyzing the decision, I realized that if I would have quit when I planned to, then I would have been doing it in my own strength because that made sense. I would have had the money saved by then. I would have had my living situation switched up by then to where my cost of living was cheaper. That would have been the smart thing to do based off of my plan. But if I was leaving in that moment, I would have had to been totally reliant on God, not in an irresponsible way, right? I wouldn't have been living in my car, but I still would have had to be totally reliant on him. And so I decided that that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to choose faith. And so I quit. I was naive enough to think that me quitting meant I was going to be successful overnight. Like, oh, God told me to quit my job. So business about to be booming.
We out here.
Right. We out here now. Like God told me to quit, but that is not what happened one bit. And so, and I was really frustrated, but again, I'm still committed to my teaching plan of when I hear a scripture, I write it down, I study it, I pray, I'm reading different books to learn more about God and prayer and all of these things. So I'm still doing all of this stuff on the side. And so when I quit my job is kind of where my life those two aspects of my life came together because I wasn't necessarily leaving to go to a job. It was I'm in the same place all day. And so I remember I was getting really frustrated because I thought my business was going to take off and it didn't. I was stressed. I'm trying to figure out, I need to make money. I'm not making any money. I was upset. And I remember one morning, God told me to watch the movie War Room. I wasn't feeling that. I'm like, God, I'm poor. How am I watching movies? Right. So
Who got time for Netflix?
okay, like what? And so I'm like, all right, I found a movie on Fire Stick. I watched it. I was like, great, pray. Her man was about to cheat. God, I'm not worried about no man cheating. I'm worried about how these student loans is going to get paid.
Okay.
So I went to the library. I was like, okay, cool movie. Back to regular scheduled programming. I went to the library and because books are still free there and I didn't have any money to be buying books off Amazon. And I'm looking around the business aisle because I'm like, there's something I need to learn here because something's broken in this business because it ain't making money. So let me go get some business books and read up to see where I'm getting things wrong. And so I'm in the business section looking around. I come eye to eye with this book called Fervent. Now, I don't know what fervent means. So the title meant nothing to me. I did never seen that word before a day of my life. So, but on the book, it was a sticker that said from the movie War Room. I was like, oh, okay, hold on. This is a little different. Why is this book over here? Like, I'm in the business section. I'm nowhere near religion. Like, I'm in the business section on the whole other side of the library. So I was like, okay, I know enough about God at this point to where I need to pay attention to this. Grabbed the book, went home, read the whole thing, understood now, okay, God needs me to have an active prayer life. Because up until that point, like I would pray, but I wasn't praying fervently. I wasn't praying strategically. I was doing, the right thing as far as like studying and learning a word and stuff like that. But God needed me to build a relationship with him, and that relationship and that dialogue to where he can then guide my path happens through prayer. It happens through strategic prayer. Me praying, and I had to get to the point where I wasn't just praying in the form of asking God for things that I want, but I was praying to where things shifted. You know what I'm saying? Like it was more to what I was doing, that there was more to it that God needed me to understand. And that
we
book
coming up off them now lay me down to sleep prayers.
Exactly. The God is grace, God is good. We thank him for this food.
Amen.
So God was like, I was realizing like, oh, this is what I'm missing. And how crazy is that? I'm going in the business aisle because I thought what I was missing in my business was a strategy, but it was prayer. And I found what I was looking for, but it wasn't exactly what I thought it would be. So I get that book. At that point in time, I created my prayer closet. I moved some clothes out the way, had a little bean bag in that joint. And that's where I started praying. And in learning how to pray fervently and strategically and really learning how to have a dialogue with God through prayer is what really unlocked everything that I'm seeing the fruit for today.
This episode of the God Goals and Girl Talk podcast is brought to you by the Check God's Resume Journal. Are you struggling with your waiting season? Do you feel like God has forgotten about you? Sis, it's time for you to check God's resume. This dynamic journal will walk you through building God's resume in your own life. Take the time to recall the goodness and the miracles that He's performed in your lifetime. The journal has journaling prompts, a place for sermon notes, and so much more. This is a great tool just to remind you of God's goodness in your life, and an even better tool to be passed down to your children's children as they'll be able to recount your experiences with God. So get ready to recall all of the miracles that God has performed for you. I promise you, when you check His resume, He is undefeated. Click the link in the show notes to get your copy today. Now let's get back to the show.
And so in that moment, he began to show me, because I had a podcast already up until that point. It was maybe about 3 or 4 months in. And he said, look, I need you to do the show by yourself. And it was crazy because everything came in instructions. It wasn't, and I think this is a misconception that we have, is we think God is going to give us this huge picture and all of the detailed blueprint. No, he gives you instructions, and you have to give your yes. And then that leads to the next instruction, and you have to give your yes. And in the middle of all of those bricks being laid with those yeses, you look up and you begin to see what's being built. But he can't tell you where you're going first, because that's not going to require faith. Faith is having confidence in things hoped for, assurance about things unseen. And our faith is also manifested through actions. And so God told me that to do the podcast by myself. That was the first instruction. I procrastinated. I didn't know nothing about God as my CEO. I didn't know anything about Blessed and Bossed Up. I didn't know anything about Anchor Media. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know we were going to reach millions of people and all of these countries all over the world. I had no clue. I knew that he told me to do the podcast by myself. And I procrastinated on it for about 6 months because my insecurities told me that no one was going to listen to me on a show by myself. That's why I had a co-host, and I was supposed to have 2 co-hosts, but one girl was flaking and we moved on without her. But the reason why I had a co-host in the first place was because I wasn't confident in my own voice. I felt that I needed somebody else and somebody from a different perspective to balance me out. And it was working. The show was doing good. It wasn't like the show was a flop. The joint was doing good. And so, he told me to do it by myself. So I procrastinated. I got all the confirmations in the world, because you know how we love to hide behind God. Give me
one more time, God, if you just give me a text message.
Exactly. And so I was like, maybe 6 months later, I got tired of myself, where I was like, okay, you know what, Tatum? How many times you gonna ask for confirmation? And then I put myself back into that decision that I made. You told God that you were going to do things his way. Why are you playing? Like, I had to pull myself up. Like, why are you playing? Why are you being disobedient? And you putting something off, you procrastinating. That's still being disobedient. What you gonna do, sis? And so one thing I appreciate about me is I can pull myself together. It may sound crazy, but I know how to I'm not so emotionally driven where I can't get myself together. And so I was like, you know what, Tatum, you have to decide what it is you're going to do. Choose one. And so I was like, you know what? I made that decision that I was going to follow God. So I'm choosing him. I called my co-host. I'm like, hey, we met up. I told her we couldn't do the show together anymore. I didn't go into detail because I don't, something like that. I'm very delicate when it comes to other people's faith journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't want to be like, well, God told me that I need to do it by myself. Like, no. So I was like, I just have to do it by myself. I said we just can't do it anymore, and we just left it at that, and we started talking about other things for the rest of the time we were at lunch together, and I left it at that. So after that, I'm like, well, what's going on then, God? Come to find out, we had a trademark issue with the name of the show, and so I was like, what am I going to do? So I ended up talking to my lawyer, and she said, well, you got to change the name. And I was like, oh my God. I went through, and this is why prayer is important as well. I went through all this praying and fasting for God to make the trademark go through, or to make this go away so that I can keep doing what I was doing just by myself. Because at this point, I didn't know what the show was turning into. Mm-hmm. So after being frustrated for what seemed like forever, I was like, well, let me change my approach. God, is this what you want me to do? Because at first it was, I'm trying to pray what I want to happen. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, maybe I'm like, it's not changing. And I know biblically, that the prayers of the righteous avail of much. I know that some things only happen through prayer and fasting. So if something's not happening because I'm praying and fasting, maybe I'm doing this wrong. So I said, well, God, is this what you want me to do? Like, how do I deal with this? He says, no, change the name. And I'm like, to what? Like, you know what I'm saying? Yes. To what?
Help me. You got me out here and told this girl we gonna do the podcast together. Like, girl, so funny.
You looking crazy. And so then I was like, okay. But before he told me the name, he said, before I changed the name, he told me what the mission was. Because I'm like, God, what are we doing? He was like, look, because the podcast, we originally started it because I wanted to talk about the journey of entrepreneurship. He was like, you had it right-ish when it came to talking about the journey, but business is not just the journey I want you to talk about. I want you to teach my people how to make me the head of their business. These things that they're out here building, they're trying to build it without me, and I gave it to them. And they're going to the world, in the world system, in the world's influencers, and the world's strategists, and the world's coaches, trying to get their answers. But I am the answer. So just like you went to the business aisle to find your answer, and you found me, that's what I'm trying to do. And I need them to make me the CEO, because at the time, this is where like everybody was putting CEO in their bio of like.
Oh, yeah.
Some business that ain't even legally formed.
Like, Grant, you had an LLC 2 days ago, but okay.
Don't even have the LLC, friend. You're just saying that you're a CEO.
For real.
So you operating by default as a sole proprietorship, because you didn't even do the due diligence of figuring out what type of business entity you need to form. Oh, you Lord. Just CEO in your bio. You have a brand. So, and so he was telling me that, you need to teach people how to make me the CEO. And I was like, what? How am I going to do that? Like, I'm not a pastor. I'm not a preacher, because I'm still thinking that somebody else had to validate or authorize me to speak about God. And so I was like, how am I going to do this? But nevertheless, not my will, your will. You're going to have to tell me what to say every week, because I ain't got it. You got this whole mission of what you want me to talk about, what this show is now changing to be. I don't have it. And so that's what I committed to, and that was maybe 3 years ago. And the show since then, I mean, I don't like, the show blows my mind.
First off, the intro to the show gets me ready for whatever. Like the intro, if y'all have never listened to an episode of Blessed and Bossed Up, like when I tell y'all, whether somebody in the car, not in the car, when I get in my car and I'm on my way to work, I'm like, oh, it's Sunday? All right, Sunday was yesterday, it's Monday morning. Let me tell you what I'm about to be on this morning.
I'm glad he ain't told me to change the intro, because that was pre-save Tatum who picked the intro.
All right, y'all, we are going to stop there for this week's episode. I pray that y'all have been loving this interview so far. Make sure you come back next week, because it continues, okay? The gems continue to drop. So make sure that you guys continue to love God, love yourselves, and love people. And I'll talk to you guys next week.